Bye-bye. So I can do my makeup, watch it in the bathroom.
Miss, please turn off your microphone, please.
You sure? Me? Put it out.
Hello, everyone.
Oh, hold on 1 second, Chris. Chris, unmute yourself. We have a problem with the people coming on. Could you just unmute yourself, please?
There we go. Hello, everyone. So glad to be here. It is an honor and a privilege. My name is Chris Vandenbos, and I'm with Police on Guard. Today, we have the honor and privilege of being joined by the Honorable Brian Peckford from up here in Canada. Brian is the former Premier of Newfoundland. I got to say that properly, otherwise I'll get in all kinds of trouble. And he served as Premier of the province of Newfoundland from 1979 until 1989. He is also one of the signatories of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, for those of you who don't know, is the highest law of the land. As police officers, when we take an oath to uphold the Constitution and the Charter. Brian, it is an absolute honor to be here with you today. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a lot of other guests joining us as well, and we can't wait to hear from you first.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so I think I have about 25 or 30 minutes. And so I'll try to explain the Canadian circumstance so that people have a better appreciation for that northern part of North America, the mouse that sits next to the elephant. And because we are or have been a democratic country for some time, it's interesting to know what's now happening in Canada as it relates to our
Okay. I'm sorry. Wait, Brian, I'm going to ask everybody to please mute your microphones.
Million speakers.
Please mute your microphones. Otherwise, I have to remove you from the Zoom. I'm sorry. So please remove it. Otherwise, you'll be removed. I'm sorry. Please turn off your mics. You must be mute mode. Please. Okay. So again, Brian, I'm sorry, sir.
Okay, so I'll start again. My name is Brian Peckford. I'm a Canadian, former First Minister of the province of Newfoundland and Labrador from 1979 to 1989, and the only living First Minister who was a signatory to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is a constitutional document which protects the rights and freedoms of all Canadians. Canada is the second largest country in the world geographically. There's only one country larger geographically, and that is Russia. So it's a very, very large country. It is a federal state, like the United States, like Australia, like Germany. In other words, all of the power is not centered at the center of the central government, but is shared with, in our case in Canada, the provinces. In the United States, they're called states. In Australia, they're called states. And the same way in Germany. In other words, we're not like the United Kingdom, we're not like France, which are unitary states. Canada is a federal state and shares powers. And this is very important in the pursuit of constitutional development in all of these federal states and in Canada. Now, Canada became a country in 1867. And because we're on the North American continent, I'll compare everything here to the United States because they're also a federal state and on the same continent. Canada, as I said, was formed in 1867, unlike the United States, which was formed much earlier in 1776. What's really significant for this program today and for you to understand Canada vis-a-vis the United States is that the United States in 1776 only had 15 years to go to 1791 when they had a Bill of Rights. In other words, a document in the Constitution which protected the individual rights and freedoms of individual Americans. In the case of Canada, We were formed in 1867, but we didn't have a written document protecting individual rights and freedoms until 1982, 114 years later. This is significant in talking about rights and freedoms in North America, because the United States of America and Americans have had a culture, if you will, from 1791 of talking about a written individual rights and freedoms, whereas in Canada, it's only been 40 years.
Oh my God.
In order for, in other words, therefore, Canada has not had the same culture as the United States in talking about and protecting individual rights and freedoms. The mere fact that I'm still alive and I'm one of the signatories to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms speaks volumes to that and personifies what I'm trying to say. And so from 1867 until 1982, Canadians, in order to protect and advance their individual rights and freedoms, had to depend upon British common law. British common law, because Canada evolved from the British system. We were a colonies of Britain until 1867. The four units in Canada which came together to form Canada were Ontario and Quebec and New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. So Canada started with only 4 provinces and the central government and the federal government when it formed in 1867. As a lot of you may know today, Canada now consists of 10 provinces and the federal government and 3 territories in the north, the Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut, which are sort of federal territories. So in Canada today, and this is very important, in Canada today, we have 14 individual parliaments. The Parliament of Canada, a parliament in each of the 10 provinces, and an actual parliament in the 3 federal territories of the Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut. And the importance of that is because during the last 2 years that we're most concerned about, the last 2 years, that all 14 of these parliaments have issued in their own right mandates relates to how they were going to mitigate the so-called pandemic, the so-called virus. And so there are 14 individual mandates in Canada, all of them with their own sort of differences. And that's important too, and including, of course, the federal government. Now, when the pandemic so-called occurred and the governments reacted very irrationally to this pandemic, they started to issue various mandates and draconian measures to allegedly mitigate what the damage was going to be from this virus and this pandemic. And in so doing, irrationally, as happened in many other parts of the world, they violated various parts of their own constitution. In the case of Canada, they violated the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the very document in the Constitution which protects the freedoms and rights of all Canadians. Now, I am one of the few people who was at that conference in 1982 that created the Charter of Rights and Freedoms that's speaking out. All the first ministers have passed away except me, but there are other people who were at that conference, either ministers or bureaucrats, who have failed to come forward and defend the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is very unusual. And we find this in other jurisdictions around the world, where a lot of people have remained silent, either because they were somehow conflicted in their positions, somewhat like places all over the world where individual people in research institutions, in universities and so on, have kept quiet, knowing full well that the science doesn't support what has been done by all these governments. Well, this has happened in Canada too. And a lot of people around the world always looked upon Canada as being a very peaceful, democratic nation that abided by the rule of law and so on. Well, this has not happened in Canada as it relates to the pandemic. There's been a complete breakdown in our institutional and democratic system as guided by our Constitution. And so this is an extremely unfortunate circumstance which has happened to our country. And so I've been, as well as many other, like doctors and other freedom-loving people, have been arguing and fighting against the federal government of Canada and the provinces and territories of how they instituted these mandates. Now, in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, there are 4 sections which really protect individual rights and freedoms, which I will highlight so that you'll understand that it's clearly stated in our Constitution and in our Charter that these rights and freedoms were supposed to be protected. We have a section 2 in our Charter which talks about freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, freedom of the press. It talks about freedom to associate and freedom to assemble. You're very familiar with these in the United States and in other parts of the world. Well, they're also in our Constitution for the last 40 years. We have a section 6 in our Constitution which talks about the right to move around Canada, the right to leave Canada. We also have a section in 6 which also talks about the right to make a living or to earn a living or livelihood anywhere in Canada. All of these provisions, by the way, have been broken and violated by the government of Canada and by all of the governments in the provinces and the territories. Section 7, which you might be very, very interested in, talks about the right of every Canadian to life, liberty, and the security of the person. And of course, any definition or explanation of the security of the person would have to come right up against the concept of injecting people with some kind of vaccine that obviously the person would have to inform consent. And so that's right in our Constitution, the security of the person, which protects the person, so-called, in our Constitution. And then we have section 7, which talks about life, liberty, right, as well. And then we have our final section, every Canadian is equal before the law. Sections 2, 6, 7, and 15 in our Charter are supposed to protect the individual rights and freedoms of all Canadians. These are the sections which are being violated by the government of Canada and the governments of all the provinces and the territories of this nation. And this is a very fundamental problem that we now have in Canada, where governments have just brazenly gone ahead and pretended that they're abiding by our Charter of Rights and Freedoms when they are not. And why I'm so vocal in Canada today on opposing what these governments have been doing. Now, what has happened, that these mandates were not even enough for the government to do. When truck convoys started in Western Canada and moved all the way across the country, and then in Eastern Canada moved all the way to the center of the country and congregated in the capital city of Canada, Ottawa, the government of Canada saw fit, irrationally again, and without justification, to introduce into the Parliament of Canada an additional draconian measure called the Emergencies Act, which essentially gave power to the government of Canada to freeze people's bank accounts, to remove the trucks and the people from the capital, and do other very nasty things, which nobody in Canada thought a government of Canada would ever do. It reminded people of the War Measures Act that Pierre Elliott Trudeau, when he was a prime minister, brought in back several decades ago. And now his son, who's the prime minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, has followed in his father's footsteps with this Emergency Measures Act. Well, it didn't last all that long because obviously this was such an extreme measure that people from all over the world became very aware of this. And a lot of the banks and major financial institutions obviously were on to the Prime Minister's office and to the government of Canada, preaching the message that if you're going to act like a banana republic, well, investment in this country will not continue. And so very quickly, the government of Canada, within a few days, withdrew that Emergency Act from being the law of the country and doing what it did in Ottawa. Now, people must understand that this act actually was in operation
We lost you, Mr. Peckford. You're muted.
Yeah, and so this was a very serious infringement of the rights of Canadians, of course. And then they arrested, under the act, a number of people who were part of the truckers' convoy. And the lady, Tamara, who was arrested, was arraigned in court in shackles. And this was, I mean, an amazing thing. This lady was only alleged to have committed a crime. She still hasn't been found guilty of anything, but she was brought into the court in her first hearing in shackles, as if she was some kind of murderer or terrorist. This is a lady, you know, 5'2", 5'4", a Métis, a First Nations person of this nation of Canada, brought in shackles. And who did she appear before? She appeared before a judge who was a former candidate for the party that's now in power in Canada, Justin Trudeau's party. This was the person who was to hear the case against one of the leaders of the truck convoy. So these are the kinds of things that have happened in Canada. Of course, her case is still ongoing in the courts of Canada. But here is the what has happened to our democracy. It's become malignant. It's become broken because the governments of this nation have been able to get away with violating through their mandates the Charter of Rights and Freedoms all over the country. And the central government, the federal government of Canada, even went so far as to introduce additional measures to try to curb people's right to protest. Attended the truckers' convoy in Ottawa and spoke there on Parliament Hill to them. The lawyers representing the truckers' convoy also represent me in a lawsuit that I've taken out against the federal government for their travel mandate. We're the only country in the world right now, or any at least Western industrialized country, that has a travel mandate in place whereby myself and others who are unvaccinated in Canada cannot travel anywhere in Canada on train or cannot board a plane to go anywhere in Canada. Given, as I said, we're one of the largest countries in the world, the second largest, travel is extremely important. So many people's businesses are in various parts of the nation. Now they can't travel to conduct their business, nor can they go to visit family or whatever in various parts of the country. This is a blatant violation of Section 6 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And so, as I mentioned, I have, as an individual, with others joining me in a lawsuit, we have launched a lawsuit against the federal government of Canada because they're violating Section 6, my rights to travel anywhere in Canada or to leave Canada. That court case is ongoing right now in the Federal Court of Canada and is likely to be held. The public hearing has been announced, and so the hearings will be in September. So it's likely before the end of this year in Canada, we will have a decision on my lawsuit with others who have joined in with me to see whether, in fact, the courts will uphold the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and declare that what the Constitution of this country violates the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. This is an extremely important lawsuit and will, of course, have ramifications for the mandates that are in place in other provinces and territories of this country. So a lot of people are looking to this lawsuit as perhaps being the first one that's been on the wrong track and have been violating the basic rights of every single Canadian. I'm hopeful, of course, as are others, that this will see a positive outcome. One of the problems we have is that most of the mainstream media in Canada, as around the world, are not carrying a lot of this information, not carrying even that I have a lawsuit out against the federal government. And so a lot of Canadians are left in the dark as to just exactly what their rights and freedoms are, because a lot of the information by the freedom fighters of Canada is not being carried by the mainstream press. And just yesterday, two of our leading, what shall I call them, columnists or news reporters for the country, a person with the Globe and Mail and another person with the Hill Times, which is a newspaper out of the capital called the Hill Times, two of these people who've been around politics and journalism for like 20, 30, 40 years, came out again attacking what's going on, attacking those who oppose what the government is doing. So just give you an idea. And in my own case, as a former First Minister of the country and a signatory to the charter that we're talking about, none of the newspapers in Canada up until 2 weeks ago would carry anything that I wrote opposing what is going on, nor would the broadcast media. So people like myself and others have had to depend upon what we're doing here today, a Zoom type meeting, to get our message across in the alternate media. We have not been able to get our message across in the mainstream media of Canada. People from outside Canada should realize that one of the other reasons for this is that about 3 years ago, the government of Canada passed legislation and allocated to all of the press of Canada $600 million over 3 years. So the media of Canada, the mainstream media of Canada, are no longer independent. They receive money from the federal government of Canada. So they are in a conflict of interest situation and are no longer the independent fourth estate that most people advocate is necessary for a vibrant democracy. They have become preempted by their own government because they have accepted this money. They've also accepted additional money during the pandemic from the federal government and from the provinces in one shape or form. And so we do not have now an independent press in our country. Remember, I said earlier that one of the very important principles of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, as it is around the world in democracies, is the freedom of the press. Well, we do not now have a press which is free. It has been bought by the federal government of Canada. And therefore, this is a really good reason why we do not get our message out across the nation like we should be able to do in any viable democracy. Of course, I talk about it, and I'm sure I'm speaking here to people who've said similar kinds of words. We're really talking about the four horsemen of the apocalypse. That's what I call them: the big government, big pharma, the big press, and the big tech. And they've all conspired into this thing that is happening around the world. They've all conspired. And so no wonder the average citizen, even in where I live on Vancouver Island, British Columbia, all around me, most of the people who live in the complex that I live in and live in this small city of 14,000, they are not supportive of what I am doing or what other freedom lovers are doing. Just last week, a teacher in the high school in this little city invited me to attend the school to explain the Charter of Rights and Freedoms to the students in that school, especially the students who are studying history. And when I agreed, the teacher went ahead and arranged with the principal for me to speak there, and got the principal's approval, only to find out 2 days before the event was to happen, she was called into the principal's office again, and the whole thing was canceled. It was canceled. Why? Because, Mr. Peckford is in the news a lot, and somebody in the audience might ask the wrong question, and Mr. Peckford might give the wrong answer. So here is the kind of situation that exists in the country. If some people thought that I have been exaggerating, here is Exhibit A in my own small city on Vancouver Island, British Columbia, a province of Canada, where a public school has seen fit to deny the only living signatory to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in our country an opportunity to explain the Charter to the students who go to that school. And so this is a very sad circumstance, and proves once again what we've been saying, that most of the major institutions in the country have fallen victim of the great narrative being enunciated by the federal government of Canada and the provincial governments of Canada, right down to a high school in a small city on Vancouver Island, British Columbia. This is happening all over the country. I get these kinds of circumstances of people losing their jobs because they're not vaccinated, both in the government of Canada and in all the provincial governments and the territorial governments and even the municipal governments. So it's happening all over the country where people have lost their jobs, lost their businesses because of these unconstitutional mandates that have been instituted by the governments of this nation. So it is very heartening to me.
Brian, I want to tell you, it's so important what you've been doing and how you've been coming out in the public. And we brought the evidence to Canada so that you guys can pursue the information both legally, both morally, both from a standpoint that will give the data to the people, both attorneys. There'll be physicians here in the next 5 hours, and we're going to actually listen to what they have to say. We have a strict rule, by the way, everyone, just so they know, because we're on a regular Zoom call, please do not unmute. Be very careful, because we will be, the high wire can only have it if we are all muted. So we're going to thousands and thousands of people today. And if someone unmutes, I'll have to personally remove you from the grid, and I can't have you back. So please don't forget that. Brian, for all your efforts, may God bless you. I appreciate it. America was based on those same principles that you're trying to bring to the Canadians. And I thank you so much for your efforts. Dr. Peter McCullough will be one of the first witnesses that we're going to bring out, that we've also just testified on behalf of Americans, upon people that can't speak for themselves, like you're giving a voice for people that can't speak for themselves. And he's going to begin right now. So Brian, if you want to say one thing, it would be to introduce Peter McCullough right after that. You have 1 minute. Thank you so much, sir.
Okay, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. By the way, Dr. McCullough is one of the expert witnesses in my lawsuit here in Canada. So he has already provided information to Canada. There are many experts in Canada as well. Dr. Brian Bridle, for example, Dr. Paul Alexander, who's on this call. They're all people who've participated in activities in Canada. Dr. Alexander got most of his education from the McMaster's University, which is in Hamilton, Ontario, for example. He's a strong advocate. So Dr. McCullough is very important to me, both personally and to Canada, for his expert testimony that is given in my lawsuit. What a wonderful person to have as part of this program, one of the leading lights and those right early on. He was one of the early people who saw what was going on to be wrong, and he has remained steadfast and has been all over the world preaching facts about this pandemic and about the science. And there's nothing better